Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool, and tonight we are speaking about elections. Local government elections are on the 1st of November 2021, and today we're going to have a series of discussions to help you make a more informed decision about who you vote for. Now, a more informed decision is not necessarily who looks the best or who makes the best promises, but rather we want to interrogate the plans and policies that parties and ward candidates have for the next 5 years, and also look back to see whether they delivered on the plans and policies that they had in 2016. Now, joining us for this discussion after the break is Zelna Jansen, who is an expert in constitutional law, and we'll also be speaking to Dr. Michelle Maziwisa from the Dullah Omar Institute to unpack these issues. But before that, we're going to watch a short video about the election process and the role of local government. Let's have a look.
In this video, we look at why we as South African citizens should vote. Life in South Africa poses many opportunities and challenges, and we all have different ideas about how to make our country a better place in which to live. In any democracy, the power and right to govern should therefore ultimately lie with the people. During apartheid, millions of black South Africans were forced to live under the decisions of a government for which they were not allowed to vote. The right to vote was perhaps the most important driving force behind the liberation struggle. The principle of one person, one vote is the cornerstone of a democratic and free society and the basis for racial equality. But because we cannot all be politicians, we delegate this representative power to our political leaders. To do this, we vote. When we vote in elections, we choose who we think should represent us and our interests in government. By voting for them, we give permission or mandate to politicians to take decisions on our behalf. That's what we call a representative democracy. All our democratic representatives are expected to respect the country's constitution and represent voters' interests when governing the country. Now, how does voting benefit us ordinary people? It is important to understand that when we vote, we don't just choose a political party or certain politicians, but we influence the future of our country. If your community needed to vote on an issue, but very few people participated in the process, this could result in unpopular decisions being taken. Let's say, for example, there are 1,000 people in your community and only 100 of that 1,000 came out to vote. And of the 100 people who voted, 80 people chose to vote for a very unpopular position. This means that 80% of those who voted supported the unpopular option. If everyone has to abide by the decision, it will not reflect the will of the majority, since less than 10% of the community chose to or were able to vote. So, even when we feel dissatisfied with the choices offered by our political parties, it is still important to vote, even if it is for the least bad option. Declining to vote does not punish candidates or political parties, it simply means that fewer people vote the winner into power. Political leaders and parties make decisions that affect our lives. They formulate and implement policies about issues such as healthcare, education, housing, water and sanitation. They also have an enormous amount of power over the money we pay to government as taxes. Thus, we should think carefully about who we want in positions of power. When we think about who to vote for, we should look at their policies and whether we think the party will be responsive to our interests and needs. It is also important to examine the personal qualities of the candidates and to vote for leaders who we think will obey the laws, spend tax monies wisely, and not use it for themselves or on their friends or family.
We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and with me in studio is Zelna Jansen, who is an attorney and chief executive of Zelna Jansen Consultancy and an expert in constitutional law. She also does other work in civic engagement. And Zelna and I are going to discuss elections, manifestos, ward councillors, and what that is all about. Zelna, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Lenina, and thank you to inviting me, and good evening to your viewers.
So Zelna, one of the first things I wanted to ask you, we've seen, because the elections are so close, that a lot of people are talking about party manifestos, and that these manifestos are the plans that the parties or the individuals have going forward, what they have planned for, I'm assuming, the community. But could you give us more clarity on what is a manifesto? Why is it important? What role does it play in the election process? And what should we as citizens sort of do around that?
Yes, Lenina, a manifesto, it is very important. It's what a political party or an independent candidate will share with potential voters. They will say what the issues are and how they plan to deal with it in order to get a vote from the citizen. So it's almost like me giving you my CV. I want to do this job, and this is my credentials, and this is how I plan to do things. So once you share that manifesto, so these are crime is a big thing in our community, and this is how I plan to solve it. And then obviously when you now decide to give your vote to that person, to that party or independent or ward councillor candidate, then you almost enter into like a social contract, which means that they now have to deliver on this manifesto, this invisible contract. And you obviously have to, as a citizen, check and see, are they doing that? So when you look at a party's manifesto, you live in your community. Remember, we're local government, so it's community level. So what are the issues in your community? And does that manifesto speak to the issues in your community? How is it going to be dealt with? So I think it's quite an important document for the potential party or independent candidate to attract voters, but also for voters to look at and see, is this the party or candidate that is going to be able to solve our problems? Can they raise it in the municipal council? So these are all things for a citizen to look at.
Thanks, Zelna. I mean, that's so interesting. And so obviously when we're looking at choosing who we want to vote for, who is the best person or party to sort of, be that institution in our community, we wouldn't just look at one manifesto. We could actually look at, if we have a few options, a few of them, all of them, look at their manifestos and compare actually what those priorities are, and whether whether we think that's what they should be. I mean, that's sort of what you're saying. We can look at and just see their priorities and does that match? And I think what I'm saying is that there's more to voting than just choosing who we like, right? Or who looks good or who's making the best promises. The proof is really in the manifesto to go and look at what they've written down and what they've planned for the community.
Yes, no, I completely agree with you. So it's somebody said the other day, is what you put in is what you get out of your ward councillor. So if you do the work to see, is this ward councillor fully skilled to handle the stuff in the community? Does he have does he understand the issues in the community? So all of these things is going to be what you get out as a citizen. And then at the other part, yes, we are voting, and that's the one part of our democracy now. Our democracy, it's structured in such a way that you vote for a representative, but you also have to participate. And so once you vote, there's this 5-year period, so you get to participate in the plans and policies that party said it was going to do, and you can check on that. You have to interact. So it's pointless like just voting and you don't make an informed decision. And then at the end of the day, well, why is the refuse not being collected? Why are the lights not working in my street? And so you have to participate firstly by making sure you make that informed decision what is this party standing for? Is it going to work in my community? And then the person, is he rigorous or robust enough to be able, or has a good network that he can network with other ward councillors in order to get maybe some sort of economic development or deal with the social issues on a district level. Because at the end of the day, your municipality or your ward council will only have so much funding. So he's tied to that, and you need to help him implement that budget in terms of what you see the priorities are. So you have to look at the manifesto, you have to see on the news when they debate. And yes, so that is important. Unfortunately, we understand now that because there was this whole confusion about, not confusion, but uncertainty about when elections were going to take place, and it's a short time for people to mobilize votes. But there is a duty on the voter, and this is the most important thing. So the days of like saying, well, we voted for you and you haven't done anything, that's over. You have to like point the finger back at you. Why is it that this person hasn't done anything? Did I, during this process after voting, hold them accountable? I think that's quite a mouthful.
That's really interesting, Zelna. So before we go further, you know, when you and I chatted previously, you said something that was really interesting, and you've touched on it here. You said when you are choosing the person that you want to be your ward councillor, it's important to also interrogate whether they have the skills to carry out the mandate of that job. Because essentially being a ward councillor is a job. You know, they've got to fulfill a certain amount of tasks or whatever for the community. But I also know, I don't know 100%, that's why I'm asking. I also know, you know, we're not specifically voting for the specific person, am I right? I mean, we can vote for the specific person, but it doesn't necessarily mean that person within a party is going to be the ward councillor. I mean, am I right, or how does that work?
No, you are right. So obviously you are going to vote for a party, and then there are independents. So the party obviously has a list of people that they submit to the IEC, and in terms of that list, they will have ward councillors. So there would be a ward councillor for your community, but it may be somebody that's not from your community. So the party appoints. So when we vote, we'll vote, depending on where you stay, you will vote for your ward councillor. So your community will fall within, say, Ward 49 with other communities. And then you will also vote on proportional representation. So you will then vote for a party. So you'll vote firstly for your ward councillor in the ward, either appointed by the party, or it would be an independent, a person from the community. And you wouldn't be affiliated to a party. So that's the first one. And then the second one is proportional representation. So you'll be voting for a party. So when you get to the council, municipal council, then 50% will be ward councillors or independents, and 50% will be proportional representation. So if you are in a metro, then you vote twice. And the way I understand it, if you live in a local municipality, then you will also be voting for a party to represent you on the district council. Mm-hmm. So depending on where you stay, that's how it will be. I hope that answers your question. So yes, if you're voting for a party, they decide who the councillor is, or you could vote for an independent from your area, and this independent will then have to raise your issues in your community at the municipal council.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, no, that does answer the question. It makes a lot of sense. But I do want to ask, so when we are interrogating, let's say, ward councillors, let's say we're checking the CVs now. It's the first phase. Here are this bunch of people. They're all sort of applying to be the ward councillor. We have to vote. Is that a possibility? What do we look at? Because there's one thing, there's a party manifesto, and we're having a look at that, and we're having a look at the plans. The other side is, you know, are you saying we should also interrogate this person? Do they have what is their their skills history? I don't like to say work history specifically, but their skills history. Have they been very active in the community? Do they seem invested? What do you suggest we look at?
Yeah, I think people think local government is not such a big issue, but it's actually such an important sphere in government. And I think from where I'm standing, it's probably the most important election. And I say this because it's at the grassroots level. So whoever you're voting for is going to impact you directly. So yes, in terms of the constitution, they have to deal with service delivery. So it's refuse, sanitation, electricity, so those sort of basic issues. But also in terms of section 152 of the Constitution, they talk about the municipality must create development and deal with social issues. So development could be a township economy, or if you look at Mitchell's Plain, they have the promenade there, or there's a township there as well. So the councillor would, okay, yes, he'll be representing a ward, but he should have a network and a skill of knowing how to network with other councillors to see how they can create this development, how they can make this township better so that people can come there. So they would need some sort of business skills. And I mean, I'm just thinking out of the box. So that's one thing. And then they also need to, because they wouldn't just be talking to other councillors, they now have to go and approach businesses as well. And they're not going to be able to do this on their own. You're going to have to help them. I mean, you can't expect one person to do everything or a few persons. It's going to be them being the political head and leading the community with other people. So maybe they will have to look at what products can they sell, or what are they selling there, and what other buyers can they attract? Is crime an issue that people aren't coming into the area? How can they deal with it? And then if people want to start a business, what funding is government giving? They need to know that and be able to equip you. I made an example in one of my YouTube videos when I said, so say, for example, you're concerned that school learners are not, they're not getting access to information about how to access funding or which universities to go to. So you could actually, if you have a local library, you could turn that into an information hub. You could speak to your councillor and he can help you get contacts, because remember, he's there in the municipal council. And so all the parties are there in that municipality. Plus they are in a party, or if they're independent, they would still have access to these networks and think how they can get that going. But it's not something that they can do on themselves. And yes, as you can see, it's not going to be a job for the faint-hearted, because they'll be serving that community on various things, on social issues, GBV, if that is an issue, and and that leader will also have to be that sort of leader that can get other people involved. So you will be able to identify, okay, this person is really passionate about educating learners on an issue. What can I do to help her so that she can do what she does in the community and educate the learners? So this is how a ward councillor needs to think. So you need to look at, who this person is. Does he have what's his history? And there's going to be funds involved. So, is there a history of, corruption with this person? Can we trust him with the funds to use it to the best for the community? So there's all of those things that this person has to possess. And, it has to be an ordinary person. So you don't want somebody that's far removed from the community as well. You want somebody that knows what the issues are.
Zelna, you're saying sorry to cut, but you're saying really interesting things, and you're making me think about sort of, the ward councillor not as this sort of person that's separate to us. And I say that because often the feeling is that it's a us and them thing. The feeling with government, it's us and them. I, went on a program, I think in my late 20s, a civic engagement program, and our homework was to go and meet the councillor and the ward councillor, which I did for the very first time. But it doesn't escape me that for 20 odd years I've lived in this community and sort of got by, if I can use that, without ever meeting him or knowing what he does. Now there's two things there. One, maybe my ward was run fairly successfully, and so there weren't, issues that I needed to take up. So there was lighting and electricity and so forth. But what you're saying is really interesting to me in terms of looking at the ward councillor and looking at local government as a partner within, so you're making me think I can build up I can look at my community. I can look at not just the things that are wrong, but certain things that are missing and how it can be better. And I remember some of the things I thought about when I was younger, which I think we could still do with, is sort of recreation centers for the youth, or maybe some things that I've read other people have spoken about is cleaning up the parks. There might be a lot of unsavory characters at the parks. It's not safe for kids. Or, some of the issues that also arose in my ward specifically was there was too few police officers or police vans to respond to. So are those issues that we can then go in, and when you speak about involvement, is that saying I'm a part of this community, my ward councillor should be a partner in building up this community and helping us to bring stuff in here, like you're saying, possibly information hubs around tertiary education. Our ward councillor is supposed to help us with that. And in approaching them, we can also say, we know you've got a budget to help us develop this community. What is the budget and how can we use it? I mean, am I presenting like credible scenarios here?
No, you are. You're spot on. Remember, and even if the person you vote for don't come in, remember, you still have to work with that person because you live in this community, your kids are living there, and property is expensive, so it's very likely that your grandkids are going to be growing up there. So you want to create this partnership. You have to have that partnership. So then, once again, you need the right person for the job that you can trust to do it, and that will help you, bring about that. But you are right. Those are the issues, and they can't do it on their own. They need the community to help them. Now, I'm not saying everybody, but at least those that are in the community that are active, like yourself, you would be active, but you would be speaking to people in your community and they will tell you what the issues are. And so it will have to evolve around that.
Thanks, Zelna. We have to go to a break soon, but I just want to ask you before you go. So one interesting thing that came up for me is applicants, if I'm saying that correctly, who are standing independently for ward councillor and who are not affiliated with a party. And so I'm a bit sort of, I guess, confused around that. What does that mean? What is the implication of someone becoming a ward councillor and they're not affiliated with a party?
Well, if it's an independent, they are not affiliated to a party. So if you have a grievance with that person, so you can't write to the party's chief whip so that and the party will probably have internal measures on how to deal with issues. So if it's an independent, you would then have to write to the council, the municipal council, about whatever gripe you have with them. And then they would then have their internal processes from what I understand. So that is what you're looking at. So there is the advantage of if he's in a party, it's obviously more networks. But if he's independent, he's going to be focused on pushing your issues in the municipal council. So there's that sort of distinction that you need to make.
Oh, that's very interesting. When you say, sorry, did you say when it's independent, is more likely to be pushing your issues? I mean, is there?
Yeah, I would like to think. I mean, I wouldn't be an independent for a ward that I'm not staying in. I wouldn't know the people.
Yes.
Or you never know. Maybe they want to get an independent. The community can come together and say, I don't know if he's registered on the IEC list, but they could say, let's approach this person from out there. He's got the skills. He's got it. Let's let him. Ask him to run. There's nothing from what I understand, there's nothing that stops them from doing that.
Yeah.
It could have been a former CEO. They could be from maybe in Hazen, Bokmakiri, and they say, let's get this person in. He's got the contacts and that, and he can do that. And they could vote for him. I mean, there's nothing that prevents that.
Okay,
the only thing is, he's an independent. Now, you can't go to the party. You'll have to go to the municipal council, and they would have processes to deal with that.
Zelna, we are out of time, but I want to thank you so very, very much for this really informative conversation. I've learned a lot. I'm sure the viewers have. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to come and share. And I really hope people are going to be encouraged on the 1st of November to go out there, but before that, to actually look at some manifestos, do a little bit of research, and just make that informed decision. Speak to people in your community, speak to your neighbors, and just go out there, despite what has happened. Go out there because you're voting for something that's going to impact you where you stay.
Thank you so much, Zelna. We have to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Speaking about elections. Now, before the break, we spoke to Zelna Jansen, who explained to us, what are party manifestos, what are their role in elections, and, what a ward councillor does. And now we are going to be speaking to Dr. Michelle Maziwisa, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Dullah Omar Institute and is part of the multi-level government law and development project. Welcome, Dr. Maziwisa, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Lenina. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for having me.
So you have done some very interesting research around government and civic engagement, looking at gender. And, here on the Womxn Show, we love discussing gender. So I would like to sort of start this segment about looking at women in politics. Last year, 2020, you did an article around women as candidates. And I wanted to start by just looking at, what is the context around women's involvement in politics? Has it increased? Has it improved? Where are we now in terms of women standing as ward councillors?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I think you could say from the first election, the first local government elections, the numbers have slowly increased, the numbers of women's representation. They've slowly increased over time, but perhaps they have not increased fast enough. A lot, over the years, we can see that we still have not reached that 50% representation mark. We still do not have gender equality at the local level in terms of women's representation. And we can also see from the statistics over the past few elections that when it comes to ward elections, there's generally a lower representation of women in comparison to the proportional representation system.
I want to move into what you said in terms of so female participation or female candidates has increased since over the years, but not enough. We haven't reached the 50% representation. And you wrote something in your article, which was not having gender-balanced local governments creates a democratic deficit. And that was really interesting to me. And I wanted to ask, why is it important to have more women involved in politics? And, when we speak about that, is there also sort of research that shows there's more, for instance, in business, they say research has shown that having more women in executive positions actually increases the bottom line in profit. And is it a similar thing in politics?
That's a very good question, and I'll tell you why. A lot of women don't see themselves in politics. I think a lot of women are intimidated by the idea of going into politics. It's perceived as a dangerous game. It's uncertain. Political players can play a dirty game, so it can be very intimidating for women. But politics is actually an area where women should be seeking to take part, to be involved. Because when we look at electing representatives at the local level, we're speaking of democracy. And what does that mean? It means that we as the people are governing, but through our representatives. So what does it then mean for us if our representatives do not necessarily understand our experience of life? When you think about it, a municipal councillor, that's a title, that's an office, but it's a human being. And that human being experiences life in a particular way. They have certain experiences which influence the way in which they understand things, they understand processes, the way they interpret certain things. So when you think of government at the local level, and I want to just maybe add at this stage that in the South African system of government, there are the three spheres, the national, provincial, and the local. And the Constitution gives each of these spheres certain competences. where they have the authority to administer functions and to make laws or bylaws in the case of local councils. And some of those areas where local government has competences are areas that are especially important for women. I'll give you examples. Childcare facilities is a local function. Electricity reticulation, although that's a bit contested, is also at least partly a local function. And then water and sanitation services. Those are issues that are at the center of women's everyday life. And the way that women experience access to those particular public services like water and electricity is quite different from how men experience them. And I'll tell you why. If you look at statistics, it shows that across Africa and also in South Africa itself, women are generally the majority of water carriers. So in instances where there is no running water at the home, women generally carry that responsibility of getting water. Women also carry a greater care responsibility, what we call unpaid care work, that they have to do around the home, which usually requires both water and electricity for taking care of the family, for cooking meals, and so forth. And those are matters that are the competencies of local government. So if we don't have women represented at those levels who have a particular experience of what it means to not be able to access water, what it means to not be able to access electricity, the risks that are involved for women when they have to go and fetch water over long distances, the risks of, say, gender-based violence, sexual violence, if they have to go and walk back at night, or if they have to use a communal toilet at night. Those are issues that women would understand differently from men because of their experiences. But if we don't have women represented on municipal councils, then some of those issues may not necessarily make it to the table for discussion, right?
Yeah.
And the other issue then is also, we know that women are not one homogeneous group. Women are all different. Women all have different experiences. So that's why it's not enough to just have one or two women. We need to have more women represented so that the different types of women and different types of experiences of women actually make it into council and into decision-making roles, so that it can be truly representative of the people and therefore achieve a more effective democracy.
I love everything that you just said there, and I feel so happy that you brought this in, you know, and especially when we're looking about gender-based violence. I've been thinking, you know, as I was planning for the show, you know, how to present it in a way that is different from just, you know, there's a bit of GBV fatigue, I think sometimes, but you are making me think about a woman I know who lives in sort of a communal area in, I think it is Joe Slovo or somewhere, but it's a group of rooms and there is a communal tap. Okay. And I remember during the drought where they were switching off the water for a certain amount of hours and on only for a specific amount of hours, women were the majority of the water carriers. She was a single woman, but what she said was, when they switched the water on, it was really late at night. It was where there were much less people, and so her window for fetching the water was really dangerous because she was alone. And there was at least one occasion when there was someone strange lurking around, and a neighbor had offered to stay with her while she fetched the water. And so, even just contextualizing that the fact that we really need water and electricity to carry out care work is something that I hadn't considered so deeply, but it is true. And then, you know, so these are issues within our municipality. And before the break, we were talking about, you know, Zelna Jansen mentioned that it's not just a matter of looking at what's wrong, but it's also a matter of development. You know, your ward councillor should be a partner in the development of the community and help you to look at things like, for instance, access to information hubs, looking at things. And you are making me think about that. If there is water, but the sight of the water is really dangerous for women, only a woman will be able to communicate that danger and allow the council or municipality in some way or other to put in interventions around the site or the pathway to that water that will be safe. I'm sorry, I'm going off a bit here because you're really making me think.
You're absolutely on point, because what you're speaking about now actually takes us to another important thing, which is spatial planning, right?
Yes.
How the working of the city or the municipality, how is that area where women's lives are experienced, how is that structured? How is it framed? Is it designed in a way that speaks to women's concerns, women's issues? Is it designed in a way that accommodates the needs of women, right? So that's also something that is debated at the local level, for example, through the planning of the Integrated Development Plan, the IDP, and also, even more importantly, in the allocation of resources at the budgetary level, right? Because the municipality has to pass a budget to implement the goals and the targets that have been set out in the IDP. But if those issues are not raised and are not adequately addressed and voted on and decided on and put into motion, then we'll be talking about this for the next few years. We'll continue having this conversation. And that's why we need to have more women actually represented to champion these issues. And you mentioned the important role that ward councillors play. Ward councillors have to work quite closely with their communities and the ward committees. And some of the disjoints that comes in that relationship is where information does not flow well enough or clearly enough from the bottom up, from the communities into the municipality, the municipal council, and also vice versa, information from the council down to the municipality community. So that also creates a disjoint there. But if we have a ward councillor who is present, who is accessible, who operates in a way that is transparent, who is accessible to the people, then that can improve the dynamic and also facilitate development in the area. And it can also help to raise those issues that are not currently making it to the table in council, if that relationship is operating well.
So I want to ask about, you mentioned, you mentioned briefly about also the plans and manifestos and what makes it onto the agenda. And I know that the Dullah Omar Institute has done, at least in 2016, an analysis of gender and its mentions within there, and that they are doing another one in 2020. But I wanted to ask, when we look at the manifestos, and perhaps your experience in having looked at it, however much your department has, gender and GBV, are those issues prioritized within the manifestos?
That's a good question. I haven't looked at the manifestos in detail, especially lately. I haven't looked at this year's manifestos. So perhaps that can be a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
And I can give you better feedback on that later.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. Definitely need a follow-up.
Because, what I could say is we've all seen how elections work in practice. Manifestos are there, they have high and lofty goals. They're very appealing because politicians are trying to seek out an audience that will elect them into power. So they'll tell you what you want to hear. But what then becomes an issue is, does that translate when the council has been elected? Does it translate to what we see on the ground? Does it translate to policy decisions, budgetary decisions, legislative decisions that actually promote the same goals that are written out in the manifestos?
Yeah, and then I'm going to add that maybe what's important right now is not so much to look at the 2021 manifestos, but to look at the 2016 manifestos and have a look at actually what's been implemented since then and who's implemented the most. That might be just doing a review. But I do want to ask before we go, in terms of the increasing women's representation, I have read some research that spoke about, and it's not just research, it's actually, when we look at this from a global perspective, from a national perspective, we know that generally women are judged more harshly than men. And women in politics, often the focus is less on let's say, the manifestos, plans, priorities, their work experience, and it's more on what do they look like, how do they dress. We've seen this in the US elections, we've seen it locally as well. We see even at political events where, you know, when it comes to females, their outfits are often sometimes more of a topic than, you know, what they've spoken about. So I was wondering, can you just speak about some of the barriers to females sort of entering politics that you found?
Okay, so you just mentioned, you hit the nail on the head. When it comes to women participating as candidates in elections, there's usually a lot more focus on the woman's appearance. There's also a lot of focus on the woman's previous sexual relationships, for example, things that have nothing to do with how the woman will actually perform her responsibilities if elected into that role. And I think that comes in because of the systemic patriarchal tendencies in our society, which perceive men as, you know, being the ones that are supposed to take on these leadership roles and make decisions. But what we really want is, we want decisions made about us to include us. We have to be part of that decision making. So when it comes to elections, I think it's also an issue about training at a young age the entire population, bringing that awareness that, you know, it's a political dirty trick that is used, but it can only continue to exist if our society continues to believe the lie that women are not actually supposed to be equal to men. So if we don't address those systemic issues at a community level, if we don't address them at a national level, then they'll continue to come up. And they do, not only in South Africa, they do all over the world. I mean, there are also additional barriers that prevent women from that affects or prevent women from actually taking part as candidates. For example, if you look at access to education, right? We have women and girls, when they're still girls, are we providing equal access to education? Are we training the girl child that education for girls is equally important as education for boys? Are we providing the girl child an opportunity to develop life skills, to acquire education, information, in order to be able to represent themselves and articulate themselves and express their needs at a later stage? How are we equipping the girl child? We just celebrated the International Day of the Girl Child. How exactly, what policies are we putting in place to make sure that the girl child is trained from a young age that you are equal, you deserve to be at that table, you deserve to speak out about the issues that concern you, that representation in government is not just for some people, it's for you as well. And you can be the one representing the people. I mean, if you consider there are other societal issues that also influence why women don't want to sign up as candidates for elections. One being what you mentioned earlier, the care burden that's placed on women. Women have to consider before they sign up as a candidate, they have to consider what am I going to do about getting my children to school and back? What am I going to do about homework? Am I going to be able to attend those meetings? What am I going to do about mealtime? Will I be able to prepare the meals and still attend the meetings?
Dr. Maziwisa,
and so forth.
Maziwisa, I'm so sorry to cut you because I'm sitting here actually overwhelmed by everything that you're saying. We are going to bring you on to do another show, and I was actually going to add, you know, besides the access to education and grooming them early to be leaders, also it is the unpaid care work and childcare that are, for me, I think for women, massive barriers. I'm so sorry we have to go to break. I want to say thank you very much for your contribution to this conversation, and we are going to see you very soon again here on the show.
Thank you so much. If I could just say one last thing.
Okay.
I think going forward, it's important that that our lawmakers equip the IEC with the responsibility to actually reject party lists that do not accommodate gender parity. I think that would be my parting word, because without that, we're going to sit with this conversation again.
Yes.
But thank you so much, and I hope we speak again soon.
It is a pleasure. That is the parting word, but I'm going to leave it there as the opening for our next show together. Thank you once again. We have to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. We are almost at the end of our time together, but before we go, we have another short video to show you to round off our discussion. Let's have a look.
Judge our current government's performance in the previous 5 years. In this way, voting allows us to hold those in government accountable. Accountability involves the obligation of elected political leaders to answer for their decisions. If you approve of the government's performance since the previous election, or it is the only party that you feel happy with, you may want to re-elect the same political party or candidate. If you think the current government did not live up to your expectations and did not improve people's lives or passed policies that are not supported, voting allows you to show your dissatisfaction by choosing another party or candidate. If enough other people feel the same, a different government can come into power. South Africa's political system awards seats in parliament in proportion to the total number of votes a party receives in an election. This means that even parties that obtain a low proportion of the votes can gain representation and influence decision-making processes in parliament. Thus, even if the party that you voted for is not represented in government, it can still use its role in parliament to monitor the ruling party and hold it accountable to what it promised and to the constitution. The majority of people in South Africa have only enjoyed the right to vote since 1994. Before 1994, the apartheid government ran South Africa and many people's voices were not heard. The right to vote was perhaps the most important driving force behind the liberation struggle. The principle of one person, one vote is the cornerstone for any democratic and free society and the basis for racial equality. So, when we vote, we recognize how privileged we as South Africans are to exercise the rights that we fought for so long. The right to vote is entrenched in the Bill of Rights in Chapter 2 of our Constitution. The Constitution affirms that every person from the age of 18 may take part in all South African elections. By voting, you play a part in keeping South Africa's democracy alive and healthy. A successful democracy can only survive and flourish if citizens see their participation in the political process as their responsibility, even if you are not happy with your political leaders. As an individual, voting is the easiest way to contribute to and participate in the democratic process. By taking part in elections, we help our democracy work. Elections make democracy happen. By voting, we safeguard the rights that we hold dear. So why should we vote? We should vote because we care about the future of our country. We should vote to support the current government or, alternatively, to support the opposition if we believe that either a strong opposition or even a change of government is necessary. And we should vote simply because, in a democracy, we can.
And that's all we have for today's show. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lenina Rasool. Goodbye.